Yeah, I think it's really relevant to make sure that we've got empathy with the user and we're thinking about them. I think that means obviously you always want to be bearing in mind who your audience is. But I think with certain things, you also want to try and think about how are they feeling? Like by the time they come to your documentation, is it something that they're coming because they're curious and they're in kind of that kind of a mindset, or are they coming there because they're frustrated and they've been trying to get something to work, it's not been working, and you need to make sure that the documentation is the thing that unblocks them.
Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast, where 𝐊𝐞𝐲 of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Domi Sinclair, Senior Technical Writer at Collibra. Welcome, Domi. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you.
Great. So it's a pleasure to have you as a guest to the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast. So Domi, can you please help us to understand a little bit more about yourself and how did you get into this profession of technical writing?
Yes. Well, I almost got into it a little bit by accident. Basically, how I ended up in technical writing was I was working as a learning technologist, which did involve some documentation, but I actually interviewed for a job as a business solution analyst, which I failed. I didn't get the job, but they really liked me and they actually said, "Hey, have you ever considered becoming a technical writer?" Until then, I didn't even know that was an option. And writing has always been a passion of mine, along with kind of an interest in technology. So I started looking into it, found a job at a company that I knew about with software I was familiar with, applied, was able to get that, I kind of grew and learned from there.
Great. It's a great different story I heard from you, Domi. So there's been a lot of talking on being empathy or empathizing with users, especially when creating support documentation. So according to you, what is user empathy and how relevant is it when creating support documentation?
Yeah, I think it's really relevant to make sure that we've got empathy with the user and we're thinking about them. I think that means obviously you always want to be bearing in mind who your audience is. But I think with certain things, you also want to try and think about how are they feeling? Like by the time they come to your documentation, is it something that they're coming because they're curious and they're in kind of that kind of a mindset, or are they coming there because they're frustrated and they've been trying to get something to work, it's not been working, and you need to make sure that the documentation is the thing that unblocks them. And so make sure that it's very concise, straightforward, because if you are frustrated when you're coming to something, you don't want a load of extra fluff that you don't need. You're just need to get something done. So kind of, breaking stuff down so that some of the conceptual stuff is maybe elsewhere, so that, you're kind of making it easier for people if they are frustrated or if they are wanting to explore, that, they're catered for either way.
Great. So Collibra being a data intelligence company, how do you make sure you are bringing that concept of empathy with users in your documentation?
Yeah, I mean, we try and make sure that we're talking to users when we can to know how they're actually feeling, as well as working with other teams within the company, sort of making sure that we're very accessible to like the customer success teams, people who do have that FaceTime so that they can give us feedback on, any places where users are feeling stuck or frustrated, so that we can, be that lubrication that helps make the user journey much easier.
Great. So I also wanted to understand a little bit more about your team, Domi, if that's okay. So how big is your documentation team? And if you can help me understand a little bit more on the processes that you go through before publishing the documentation?
Yeah. So at Collibra, the documentation team is 12 people. We have grown recently. It's the biggest team I've been a part of. My previous team was, well, initially just me. I was the entire team, and then we did expand. But yeah, so it's 12 people. We actually sit within the design team, which again is different from what I've had elsewhere. That works quite nicely because some of us, such as me, also kind of double as UX writers, and I think that works really nicely as well to kind of create some more synergy in like the writing experience and the use of language, that kind of stuff. So yeah, so we do report up into the design team and work quite closely with them. We also work a lot with the product managers. We'll all have different areas within the technical writing team that we kind of cover, and we'll have regular syncs with the product managers responsible for that area, so we can make sure that we're documenting anything. We work on release notes with them as well, so that all the release notes are nicely written and concise, and we can bring that kind of expertise that we have for writing to that as well. And then yeah, we have a peer review process within the team. Obviously we're large enough to be able to do that. That was something I didn't always have in my previous role. When it was just me, I can't really peer review myself. So that's nice that yeah, we can do that as well. And then yeah,
something like a 4-eye check.
Yes, exactly.
Great. So it looks like you are bringing that empathy with users right in the beginning of your design stage of the product. I also wanted to know, how did you feel about being a one-man army or a one-woman army to a team of 12? And I'm sure you might be managing a lot of the responsibilities, right? So how did this change affect you, and how are you handling that?
Yeah, I think it's really good. It's really nice having more people. Like, I think that although certainly like I like to be in control of things, so being one, I did like that kind of, I had that control, but I almost feel like you actually do get more control when there's more of you, because you're not kind of, you can focus more on growing certain areas and kind of getting more into detail on the things that you are interested in and that you want to drive forwards. I think that the support is also something that's really important. I really think now, even if you are one, you need to find those other people, because there will be times when you make suggestions, you know, maybe it's particular language choices that other people maybe don't agree with, but having a team of other technical writers, other people who are writers, are also kind of experts in use of language, that can then go, no, I think you're right. I think that maybe they're not understanding it, and kind of support you and help you to kind of maybe get that extra push that you need to clarify yourself and kind of fight for yourself if you need to. If people are, you know, kind of maybe coming at it from more technical language that you don't think is going to translate as well to the customer, who may not be as technical, because obviously we are that bridge, that translator sometimes. So yeah, I think kind of having other people really is a support system that I think just helps you move forwards.
Fantastic. Great. Again, I also wanted to understand, based on your experience, of course, you handled everything single-handed, and now you have a big team, which is a great news to hear. And just on your experience, what should an ideal knowledge base tool or software look like?
Well, I think an ideal tool, obviously, it needs to be easy to use. It needs to be really flexible as well. I think that you do want that space where you can really make it your own, as in your company's, and integrate different things in it as well. So whether that's integrating code snippets or integrating video is another thing that we're kind of exploring, and the different ways that you can do that. Even looking at building in like tutorials and stuff, because people do learn in different ways, and kind of, yeah, allowing that kind of flexibility so that it can work for your company and what your customers need, because yeah, it will vary depending on who your audience is.
Yes, absolutely. And is your documentation completely public, like anybody can access it, or is there a restriction, or is it a private documentation?
I Our documentation is publicly accessible.
Okay.
Yeah, for the most part. We have some, like if we have betas, then that documentation generally isn't
It's not
public 'cause
available
it's not quite
openly.
ready.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally we have open documentation.
Great. So I think we are ready to move to the rapid fire round, Domi. Anything else you would like to add in this section, or you're happy to take my rapid fire questions?
I'm happy to do the rapid fire.
Great. So who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
I've learned a lot from a lot of people. I think I would actually probably say that my husband is one of the people that I've learned a lot from as well. He works within product. He's a product director now, and he's always been really good at helping me refocus and make sure that if we're making choices, that it is like database and evidence-based and not just like on a feeling or a creative instinct. And also, obviously, being from product, he's very good at reminding me to send to the user if I ever do lose that focus. I think that, he's one of the people that's really helped me with that customer empathy and making sure I'm always focusing on that.
Fantastic. That's another different way, different person I have heard from my guests so far. And I'm sure you must be reading a lot of documentations or materials out in the web. So can you share couple of documentation related resources you have come across recently so that it can help our audiences too?
Yeah, well, there's a book I'm reading at the moment. It's not entirely documentation related. It's called Content Design. It's by an author called Sarah Winters. It is kind of from that content design, but obviously documentation can kind of be content design as well, particularly because I know that, there are a lot of technical writers that do end up doing some UI writing as well, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in there about like the science of reading and how people read things, which again, I think is really useful when you're considering documentation.
Right, great. And just coming to my last question, what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to a 20-year-old self?
I mean, that it's a possible career path is the first thing. But I think that also just to remember to always ask lots of questions, particularly like if you're talking to product managers or engineers, just make sure that you're asking a lot of questions to really understand what you're documenting and cover any possible questions that customers, users might have. But yeah, just kind of make sure that you're as curious as possible in those conversations, and you can hone it down when you've got loads of information. But yeah, it's better to have all that information.
Great. So ask as many questions as possible and bring all your curiosities out. Great. So Domi, I think with that, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Anything else you would like to share with our guests and audiences? I
think just make sure that you're enjoying what you're doing. But I think that we have a term, technical writing, but it can be so broad and varied. Like there's so many different types of technical writing and different audiences and different processes of doing it. So I think kind of trying to find the way that works for you, that you can enjoy it, I think is only going to improve the writing that you do. That's going to make a better customer experience.
Thank you. That's again absolutely fantastic to have you on this podcast, Domi. All the very best for your future engagements, and wishing you great successes and more documentation coming out from you. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.